So I first want to say, like Karen, I want to welcome you all here. And for some of you, it's your first opportunity to be part of a collaborative. But for many of you, I looked out at the audience, and this is actually your second continuing care collaborative. So welcome back. And we hope to see you again next year. A few of you have asked me what we did with the first collaborative. And for those of you who weren't there, said, what did you guys do? And I'm very pleased to report that with our first collaborative that was held in Vancouver at the WASC Centre for Dialogue, we all gathered, similar to what we did today. We went over a whole range of issues in preparation for the release of a fairly significant policy paper. We released that policy paper back in 2017, and subsequent to that, we were able to incorporate a lot of the ideas and concepts within our WASC Centre for Dialogue discussion. We incorporated that into the policy paper, and subsequent to that, I was on stage with the province to announce that there was going to be an additional $500 million invested in seniors care over the next few years. Now, while you can't take credit for that whole announcement with that paper and the work we did at the WASC, but it certainly helped to raise awareness and to put ideas forward. And a number of other things beyond just funding came out in that plan, and there's an action plan that we're now working on. So today, I'm really hopeful that the work we're going to be doing today on the collaborative and on health human resources will have a similar impact. So the collaborative is bigger. We had about 140 attendees last time. We have 170 this time. But I'm not going to say it's better. It's just as good, but it's got a different focus. It's very much more focused on just on health human resources. So you just saw from that video that we do face some fairly significant challenges. Nobody's going to kind of hide away or shy away from that. We do face some very significant challenges. And just last week we held a board meeting for the BC care providers. And one of our directors indicated, and this stat is probably going to shock you, though it shocked me, that looking out over the next 5 years, that they will have a retirement of 10% per year over the next 5 years. So let that sink in. So 10% of their workforce is going to be retiring every single year for the next 5 years. That's their projections. Now I ask you, in your workforce, if you lost 10% of your workforce every single year for the next 5 years, what kind of impact would that have on you? And that's exactly what we're facing, many of the care providers in this province, when it comes to recruiting. So we have to move quickly. Today is all about action. Today is about solutions. We need to move very quickly. We don't really have much more time for reports or analysis or theorizing on what needs to be done. We need to address the issues of that care provider who said over the next 5 years, they're losing a great deal of their workforce. So, as noted in the opening video, there are lots of challenges. And one of the challenges which isn't noted on there is right in this room. And let me give you, by way of an example. So I happen to do a lot of networking. I'm out there all the time. I have friends in various different sectors, and it doesn't matter wherever I go, if I'm talking to somebody in the film industry, they're telling me how great it is. I talk to somebody working in tourism, they're like, hey, come on in, this is wonderful. I go around and it just doesn't matter almost which sector you go to, you have real champions, real ambassadors for people saying, come and work within this sector. So to start the day, I'm going to have you participate in a very quick little exercise, and I want you to be honest and forthright, and please don't feel, everything that happens at the collaborative stays at the collaborative, right? So nothing will go beyond these walls. But I want you, just by way of show of hands, to raise your hand if you have either partaken in a conversation or you've overheard a conversation where people have been derogatory about the sector, about working on the front line, and about seniors care. Can you raise your hand if you've heard that conversation or participated in one in the last year? So, ladies and gentlemen, herein lies part of the problem, is that unlike other sectors that are out telling everybody, come on in, you gotta come and work here. This is a great place to be. These can be very rewarding careers. People have worked, I was talking to a Carrie who's going to be coming to our Carrie Award, over 30 years working in the sector, providing loving care every single day. We don't talk so much about that. We tend to focus on other things which tend to push people away. And from a health human resource perspective, I can tell you that's not a great strategy. So this is something we can do in this room today which will cost you nothing. You can do it the moment you walk out the door, is to begin talking about our sector in a way that will help to attract people as opposed to repel them. And that's a big challenge, and it can be difficult. But when you hear those conversations again, try to think about what I've said here today and try to change and try to perhaps inject something a bit more positive into the discussion. So on that note, I kind of was trying to think about what is the collaborative. Well, for this purposes for today, kind of think of it as a big Oprah set, or a big therapy session. And all of you know Oprah, she's running for president. So, so think of this as a big therapy session. And if I was your therapist, what I would be telling you is that the first part of solving your problem is identifying that you have one. I'm sure you've all heard that, for those of you who are in therapy like me. You've heard that. So we're here, and as your therapist, I'm telling you, you've acknowledged you've got a problem. Step one. So get over it. We all now know we have a problem. Today is about solving the problem and moving beyond that. So when you're participating in the workshops or you're participating in the Q&A, think about that. We all know we have a problem. We're here. We're addressing the issue of health, human resources. So try to focus on that, because we need to have solutions for not only today, but for the next year and the next 5 years and the next 10 years. And I think there's a lot of great ideas, but we need to turn those ideas into action. So speaking of ideas, I thought rather than me coming up here today and pointing out all the problems, I think the video that we introduced covers a lot of that. I thought I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, and I'm going to come here and try to offer you a potential solution, and to talk about something that I've been very passionate about over the last number of years, something that I call the Health Human Resources Pipeline. And for any of you who've heard me speak about it before, you know it can be a little bit of a complex subject. So I asked Romana, I think Romana's right in the back there, I said to Romana, you're going to have to help me. Romana does our digital media, and I said, it's a very complex issue to describe and to explain. So perhaps rather than me standing up on stage and doing it, maybe we could get it narrated and we could show it, and then we'll continue the dialogue. So on that note, if we could have the video, I'll be right back.
So how do we get to the point that we're all gathered to talk about health and resources? Well, I think it's important for us to go back to the year 1998, just to show you by way of comparison a couple of important factors. In 1998, the price of the average home was around $350,000. Our workforce was also expanding. We were still getting many people who were considering having a career in healthcare. They would come into something that I call the Health Human Resources Pipeline. And we all know in British Columbia that not everybody likes pipelines, but this is one pipeline that people might even want to hit, because that pipeline produces the very people that we needed back in 1998 to work in our publicly funded care homes, primary care, and home care. Now let's fast forward to 2018, to today. What type of situation are we facing when it comes to our health human resources? Well, we know that the average price of a single-family detached home is now $1.8 million. That's a lot of money. And everybody who owns a home that has an average of $1.8 million can now tap into things like reverse mortgages and pull money out of their homes, and they can now buy the type of health care and home care that they couldn't buy back in 1998. We also have a number of other factors right now. Not only is our population aging, so too is our workforce. We have record low unemployment. Tuition fees are very high if you're unemployed or underemployed and trying to work in healthcare. We have workplace safety issues. We have wait lists for public institutions. And lastly, we're competing with glamorous industries like high-tech, film, and tourism to try to attract new workers. So in 2018, that Health Human Resources Pipeline I talked about looks a lot different. There are fewer amounts of people going into it, but more importantly, that pipeline has now been diverted. Because of that rising land value and home values, people can now access and tap into getting their own supply of private care. That private care has now diverted some of the workers who would traditionally be going into our publicly funded primary care, residential care, and home support. And if we look ahead to the year 2025, some would argue things might even get more challenging when it comes to our health human resources. Some are predicting that the house values could go up to an average of $4.5 million, giving people a lot of access to cash to purchase private health care that they didn't have in the past. So we need some solutions, and that includes more localized training. Our school boards need to increase their capacity for the dual credit programs. We need to involve our post-secondary institutions and our private post-secondary institutions. They all need to play a role. We also need to make sure that our wages remain competitive into the future. And that low-cost tuition, it needs to be there in order to make sure that people who want to move from lower-end positions into healthcare can do so. We also need to convert more opportunities to full-time jobs within our sector. And lastly, we need to make sure that we have safer workplaces through organizations like SafeCare BC. So if we look at that health human resources pipeline into the future, I think what we could do is restore that supply that we had back in 1998. Those people who require private pay will be able to access it, and our publicly funded healthcare institutions will also have the supply of staff that they need to make sure that they can provide excellent seniors care into the future.
Okay, big thanks to Ramana again for pulling that together. So the health human resources pipeline, and the reason this is very important is because I'm just about to talk about one of those solutions, but I think it's critical that, and I was joking in the video about pipelines and people not liking them, but I think this is one that we do need to twin and we do need to expand. But how do you do that? How do you go about doing that? How do you get more people back into that pipeline so that by 2025, we're more in a balance where there's actually more people coming in, and at the other end, those who are requiring private care and publicly funded care can have access to the staff. So I wanted to quickly touch on a program that we ran back in 2007 to 2013. So it was a program that had at the table labor, the ministry, several different ministries, that had BC care providers, the private and public post-secondary institutions. We all got together and we ran a program because back in 07, 08, if you remember, the economy had tanked. We were in a very different position. There were displaced workers. There was lots of empty spaces in the colleges for training programs for HCAs. We had a real disconnect at the time. So everyone got together, came up with this program called BC Cares. And BC Cares, the goal and objective was to get those folks who were displaced or perhaps underemployed into those training courses, get them trained and get them out and get them into the workforce. So quickly on the program itself, it was a very successful coalition of all the groups that I mentioned. It did have a focus on various groups, but most importantly, when you look at some of the stats, and I could rattle off about 100 of them, but there was just a few here that I think are really important, it helped in a very short order boost enrollment. And part of it was a little bit of a marketing campaign, a social media marketing campaign, which back then was just emerging. And we used social media as a way to, going back to my previous point, we talked about the really good reasons why you'd want to work within the sector. We had a peer-to-peer discussion. We worked with GU and other unions and other staff to come in and talk about their experiences and why they're working in the sector. We had a peer-to-peer discussion, and it really worked. A lot of younger people got into the program. And within short order, those empty spaces in the colleges filled up. In fact, not only did they fill up, we now had wait lists very quickly. So that program wound down around 2013. And one of the legacies of that program was SafeCare BC. So one of the recommendations after the program is to deal with the issue of safety, because we all know that in British Columbia, healthcare aides have the highest workplace injury rates of all occupations. So the best way to deal with some of your health human resource issues is to make sure that the employees you have, the work staff that are there, are healthy and they're at work. So we created SafeCare BC out of this, but the program itself wound down. So what I propose and what I'd love to be able to throw out on the table here is that we need to get back to that BC Care strategy. We're in a different situation now with the record low unemployment, the fact we're competing with all these different sectors, and the fact that we're now getting reports from across the province that those colleges are now having empty spaces again. In fact, some of them are half empty. So we've reverted back to where we were back in 07, 08 at a very time we shouldn't, when our population is now right in the midst of aging. So we need to do something. So we've come up with a Made in BC strategy. It's, again, would be a partnership with similar key stakeholders that we had before. Would help support the ministry goal to recruit those new workers. We saw that number of 1,500 new staff over the next few years. It would provide some excellent employment opportunities, and it would integrate and align with existing federal and provincial health human resource strategies. So I just want to describe to you a little bit about what it is. Basically, it's 4 parts to it. There are 4 blocks, building blocks to the program. So back in 07 to 2013, we essentially did block 1 and block 2. And block 1 is public awareness. That's the social media campaign. Has anybody heard the radio ads that are out right now that are running, that we're doing? So we're running some radio ads about raising awareness about potential job opportunities. It's taking that public awareness and bringing it up to a level so that people are, first of all, aware of the fact that seniors care is the fastest growing sector in this province. And I dare ask you, if you walked out on the street of Surrey today and you asked who could tell you what the top 5 are, I bet you very few would say seniors care. They would tell you a lot of other sectors, but not seniors care. So we have a lot of work to do on the public awareness. Once you get the public awareness right, you get people interested that might want to go in that pipeline. They're very excited. Then the next step is eliminating barriers. And I'm going to explain that in a moment, but that's the next step. What are the barriers, once they're interested, to getting to work in our sector? What are they? How do we eliminate them? How do we reduce them? I'll talk about that in a moment. The third step, once those barriers have been eliminated, we need to provide those training spaces, and we need to be doing that across the province. We have to make sure that the training spots are available in the communities that these people are in. I went and did a listening tour around the province last year, and I heard time and time again, please, Daniel, do not create training spaces in Vancouver and expect that our kids are going to leave from our First Nations community and come down to Vancouver and come back. It's not going to work. We have to be more creative than that. So that's a component of what we're talking about in terms of training opportunities. Part of that would be involving post-secondary public and private institutions, but the care providers that are in this room would become part of the training solution. We'd be doing more on-site training, they'd be better integrated with the post-secondary institutions, and would dramatically increase the training capacity that we have in our province. And that third step, we never did last time. So that part would be new. And the fourth block is also new if we renew the BC Cares program, and that would be job placement. Once you're nearing the completion of your training, we should be doing absolutely everything to connect you with an employer as close to home as possible. And we should be making that job connection. So it's a full cycle. Public awareness, reducing barriers, training opportunities, and then job placement. And I thought I would take a moment just to pull out block number 2, because this is, I think for this room, is very important for everybody to understand what are some of those barriers. And when I talk to potential grads, or when I talk to folks who've graduated or gone through the program, I said to them, what are your barriers? And almost without exception, these are the types of things that I hear from them. The main one is the cost of tuition. It's about a 7-month program, and in private colleges, which are easier to get access to, it can be in excess, well in excess of $10,000 to take the program. I don't know about you, but if I was working at Starbucks as a barista, making minimum wage, I'd be challenged to look at paying $10,000, $11,000, $12,000 and taking on those loans to take and go into a healthcare assistant program. It's a barrier, and we need to deal with that. Secondly, the loan relief program. It's been very successful in rural and remote British Columbia in attracting nurses and doctors and getting them to go into these communities. I would dare say, and I know I might get tomatoes thrown at me here from some folks, but I would say that healthcare assistants probably need this more than nurses and doctors because of the fact they're on the lower end of the pay scale. So I think that we should look at expanding that loan relief program, and we've written to the Ministry of Advanced Education asking them to do that very thing. Make sure that there is everything we can do to get those folks into rural and remote communities. Speaking of rural and remote training, as I indicated, we need to do more of that. And I think if there isn't a public institution, a public post-secondary institution in those communities, but there's a care home, that care home should be doing some of the training. They should be able to do that training right on site. That, we think, would be marvelous. Program restrictions. We've also heard around the issue of ESL. That is often a problem with English as a second language, as a barrier of being able to become a certified healthcare assistant here in the province. And I don't want to make it sound like the carried registry is a barrier as a whole, but the carried registry has been increasing the bar. They've been raising the bar in terms of what it takes to become a healthcare assistant in this province. And every time you raise that bar, as you saw that previous slide which showed fewer and fewer people applying, fewer and fewer people coming in from out of province, we need to change that trajectory. We've got an aging population. We don't want to put more barriers to reduce the number of people that are going to be coming into the province to work as Carians. And last but not least, the dual credit program. And I became aware of this because our care provider of the year last year, she won the award, and we were chatting when we were in Victoria when the minister was presenting with the award, and she said, you know, I love my job. I really love my job, but she says, one of the things I wish we could do more is this dual credit program. And I said, what's that? You know, I'd never heard about it. She said, I got trained in high school. I actually got trained in my high school, so that when I graduated from high school, I literally, she said, I walked out of the high school and I was certified and I started working a week later. I didn't have to do all this post-secondary training. I didn't have to take student loans. I didn't have to do all this stuff. So it got me thinking, how many other school boards are doing this or not doing it? And when we did our research, it blew me away. Guess how many of all the dual credit programs, which are mostly male dominated, by the way, most of them are in carpentry, welding. Look at the kids that are going through the program, they're mostly boys, not a lot of girls. And there's mostly male dominated occupations. So there's, in my opinion, a lot of work to be done on that. But do you know how many spots they have in the whole city of Vancouver, the largest city in this province? Do you know how many spots are dedicated for healthcare assistants to train them at a time when we have a rapidly aging population? Let me fill you in. I can give you the answer on one hand. It's 2. 2 spots per year. We're not going to cut it, folks, with 2 spots per year. So we need to work with school boards like Vancouver, and we need to work with every single school board in this province and have them become part of the solution, and they need to increase dramatically the amount of dual credits that they're doing. So this slide here really just kind of touches on who the partnerships would be. I want to call back together the care providers. I want to get government back to the table. I'd like to have the post-secondary institutions and organized labor. The only reason we were successful in the first program is because we were working with organized labor, we had the post-secondary institutions there, we had the government buy-in, and the sector, the industry was at the table. It worked. It was a partnership. Why? Because, as I said to my friends in organized labor, an empty position doesn't provide union dues. It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. And it's a win-win for everyone when that position is filled, because labor can win, the employer wins, but I would say most importantly, the seniors win. And the seniors win because there's staff working in those care homes, and they help to address the issue of being short-staffed. So I'm hoping to get everybody back, and we've had some very good early discussions so far. So what do we hope to get out of it? Well, if we're successful with the BC Cares Renewal Program, we hope to increase awareness for job opportunities. We want to increase the supply of healthcare workers. We believe we're going to have fewer unfilled vacancies and fewer worker shortages, which you saw in the video is an issue. We want to help facilitate the movement of trained staff between provinces. We think there's a lot of work for us to be able to work on that. We're definitely going to be increasing the training capacity. We're going to be reducing workplace injuries. We know that from the stats and the research that being properly staffed will reduce injuries and also further lower costs. And again, most importantly, I think if we get it right and we're successful, that we're going to be able to strengthen seniors care in the province of BC. So on that note, I want to leave you with this message. We can do it. We must do it. And we will do it. And today, the second annual collaborative focusing on health human resources is going to be a very important part of us coming towards those solutions. And I want to thank you all for offering me the opportunity to get this started, and thank you so much.